The chill in the air matched the sharpness of her words. Your death would be the best gift to me. Still, I didn't react, my fingers tightening around my wine glass as I masked the shock. The faint hum of the chandelier above grew louder, matching the pounding in my chest. As her smirk lingered, I realized this wasn't just a cruel joke. That's when the truth hit. The next day, her trust fund vanished. Quietly, I knew. This was no longer just betrayal. It was war. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. The grand dining room in the Harper mansion gleamed under the crystal chandelier, the polished oak table set for three. Evelyn sat at the head, Charlotte on her right, and Robert, her ex-husband, opposite her. The evening was supposed to be a quiet, familial gathering, a rare occasion, really. The three of them together without any distractions. But the tension in the air was palpable, the kind that could only be cut with a knife. Your death would be the best gift to me, Charlotte said, her voice light, as if she were offering an offhand compliment. She took a sip of her wine, her eyes not quite meeting Evelyn's. Then I'd inherit everything. Robert chuckled, his laugh almost nervous. Oh, come on, Charlotte, that's a little dark even for you. He raised his glass as though to shrug off the uncomfortable moment. Just a joke, right? But Evelyn didn't laugh. Instead, she felt the words settle deep inside her like an ice cube in the pit of her stomach. For a moment, it felt like the room was too quiet. The sound of the chandelier's crystal tinkling louder than the conversation. She tried to focus on her food, but the words circled around her, refusing to be ignored. Just a joke, Robert repeated, dismissing it with a lazy wave of his hand. But his voice lacked conviction, the kind of reassurance that only came when someone was trying too hard to convince themselves of something. Charlotte's eyes flicked briefly toward Evelyn, a smile tugging at her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. She seemed satisfied by the awkwardness she'd created. Evelyn's chest tightened. That was no joke, not to her. Evelyn's hand froze mid-air, her fork held between her fingers, but she didn't bring it to her mouth. Instead, she watched Charlotte, watching how easily the words had come. How light they had sounded, yet how they sliced through the evening like a jagged knife. The night dragged on, the clink of cutlery and the low hum of conversation becoming background noise to Evelyn's spiraling thoughts. Charlotte's laughter, the forced joviality, the glances that Evelyn had tried so hard to dismiss. They all now pointed to something far darker than just a spoiled daughter seeking attention. Something Evelyn couldn't deny any longer. As Robert carried on about some business deal, oblivious to the shift in the room's atmosphere, Evelyn's mind rewound that moment. Charlotte's words echoing louder with each passing second. Your death would be the best gift to me. It wasn't a joke. Not even close. The more Evelyn thought about it, the more it unsettled her. Why had Charlotte said it? Was it anger? Resentment? Or something more calculating? Something deep-rooted, buried beneath a layer of entitlement and a thirst for control that Evelyn hadn't fully acknowledged until now. Evelyn excused herself from the table and made her way to the balcony overlooking the sprawling garden. The cool air hit her face, but the chill in her bones came from something else entirely. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to give in to the rising panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She had always known Charlotte was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious for her own good. Evelyn had built her wealth and legacy from the ground up, but she'd never truly thought about how much of that Charlotte believed was rightfully hers. Of course, Evelyn had given her everything, the best schools, the finest things money could buy. But this was different. Charlotte had crossed a line. Evelyn leaned on the balcony railing, staring into the garden's quiet beauty, but all she could think about was the venomous seed that had been planted in that offhand remark. It was as if Charlotte had revealed a piece of herself, one that Evelyn had been blind to for far too long, a daughter who saw her not as a mother, but as a stepping stone. A woman who had been living with an expectation of inheritance, as though it was owed to her, as though Evelyn were nothing more than a temporary obstacle. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. No, she couldn't let this consume her. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles to let a moment like this dictate her future, but something in her gut twisted. She could no longer ignore it. Charlotte's attitude had shifted. The woman sitting across from her at that table was no longer her daughter. She was a stranger, someone who had manipulated the trust Evelyn had given her for far too long. When Evelyn returned to the table, her expression had hardened. She wasn't sure if Charlotte noticed, but she didn't care. "Is everything okay?" Robert asked, his voice still light, but with an edge of concern. Evelyn didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at Charlotte, really looked at her. The same woman who had grown up under her care, the woman she had sacrificed for. And yet now, Evelyn saw only the echo of someone hungry for control, someone who had already started plotting the end of their relationship. "I'm fine," Evelyn finally said, her voice steady, but her eyes betrayed her, locked on Charlotte with an intensity she had never shown before. Charlotte smirked, as if she knew something Evelyn didn't. The dinner went on, but Evelyn's thoughts were elsewhere, the weight of Charlotte's words hanging over her like an invisible storm cloud. This wasn't the daughter she had known. And what hurt more than the betrayal itself was the realization that she had never truly known her at all. The night ended with polite pleasantries, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something in their relationship had shifted forever. She had been given a glimpse into Charlotte's true nature, and it was a version Evelyn could no longer ignore. And just like that, the dinner ended. But the unease, the betrayal, lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. Evelyn Harper knew her life was about to change in ways she never expected. The next morning, Evelyn sat in her study, the windows thrown open to let in the soft light of early morning. The stillness of the mansion, so familiar, was now unnerving. She should have felt peaceful after the brief solitude of the balcony the night before, but the unease from dinner lingered, a persistent shadow. As she sifted through papers on her desk, her phone buzzed, the alert blinking on the screen. It was an email from her financial advisor. A single line was all it took to freeze her in place. "The trust fund has been emptied." Evelyn's heart stopped. She clicked the link in a daze, opening the detailed report. Her eyes scanned the figures, a sickening weight pressing down on her chest. The balance was gone. Gone. As though someone had drained it all, right in front of her, and without a trace. Not a dollar left. It was then that the words Charlotte had said last night echoed through her mind again, sharp and unforgiving. "Your death would be the best gift to me. Then I'd inherit everything." Her blood ran cold. She didn't need to look further. She knew who had done this. She dialed Charlotte's number, her fingers trembling as the phone rang. Each beep felt like a lifetime. When Charlotte finally picked up, her voice was a little too calm, too casual. "Good morning, Mom. What's up?" Evelyn's voice was measured, tight with restraint. "The trust fund," she said, fighting to keep her tone even. "It's gone." Charlotte's response came almost too quickly, almost too smooth. "What do you mean, gone?" "Don't play games, Charlotte. It's been drained overnight," Evelyn said, her breath catching in her throat. "You know exactly what I'm talking about." Charlotte's silence stretched out for a long beat, longer than it should have. Then, when she spoke, her voice was almost bored. "It must have been a mistake, or a glitch or something. Maybe a technical error." Evelyn's blood boiled. She was done pretending. This wasn't a mistake. This was calculated. Charlotte had orchestrated this, and her casual deflection only made it worse. "Don't lie to me," Evelyn snapped, her grip tightening on the phone. "I know it's been transferred to a foreign account, to a bank I've never heard of. Don't try to pull that glitch excuse. I'll have your tracks traced, Charlotte." There was a brief silence, and Evelyn could almost feel Charlotte's smirk on the other end of the line. "Well, if you're sure, then I guess we'll just have to figure it out." "Huh?" Charlotte's voice dripped with a quiet, smug satisfaction, as though she were already planning her next move. "You'll find out soon enough. Good luck." The line went dead. Evelyn stood there, staring at the phone in disbelief. How dare she? How dare Charlotte act so unfazed, so smug, as if this was all some game? Her stomach churned with a mix of fury and disbelief. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a calculated betrayal. She had watched her daughter evolve into someone she barely recognized, someone who saw her not as a mother, but as a pawn in her own personal war for control. Her mind spun. How had Charlotte managed this? What else had she been hiding? Evelyn knew that if Charlotte was capable of draining the trust fund, then nothing was off limits. And the chilling thought came to her in a flash. What else has she taken? Evelyn wasted no time. She immediately called Marissa, her trusted lawyer, the one person who could help her untangle this nightmare. "Marissa, it's Evelyn. We've got a serious problem," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the firestorm building inside her. Marissa's tone shifted instantly, businesslike. "What happened?" "The trust fund," Evelyn began, her voice trembling with controlled anger. "It's been drained. Every single penny, and I know Charlotte's behind it." Marissa didn't hesitate. "Let me check into this right away." Moments later, Marissa called back, confirming the worst. "Evelyn, it's legitimate. The money was transferred to an offshore account. The transaction's clear. It's been moved." Evelyn exhaled sharply, her mind racing. A foreign account. A hidden transaction. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This had been planned, and Charlotte had been waiting for the right moment to strike. She felt a cold rage rise in her chest. It wasn't the money. No, that was secondary now. This was about control. Charlotte had taken the first step toward dismantling everything Evelyn had worked for, everything she had sacrificed for. Marissa's voice broke through her thoughts. "Evelyn, what do you want to do next? We can start a legal process to freeze the account, but this is going to get messy. You'll need to be prepared." Evelyn's jaw clenched. "I've already let it go too far. I'll make sure she doesn't get away with this." Charlotte's calm dismissal on the phone played on a loop in Evelyn's mind. How dare she act so smug, as though she had all the time in the world, as though she knew Evelyn would just let it slide. But Evelyn wasn't that person. Not anymore. Her anger was building into something more focused, more intense. This wasn't just about taking her wealth. It was about taking what was hers, undermining everything she had fought to build. And if Charlotte thought this was over, she was gravely mistaken. As Evelyn hung up, she stood in her study, the walls closing in around her. The house felt suffocating now, too big, too empty. A prison of her own making. But there was one thing she knew for sure now. This wasn't just about the money. It was about power, respect, and revenge. She wasn't going to let Charlotte win. Not like this. The game had just begun. And Evelyn wasn't going down without a fight. The walls of Evelyn's study had never felt more oppressive. The grand house, once a symbol of her triumph, now felt like a tomb. With each passing hour, the dread of Charlotte's betrayal deepened, knotting itself around her chest. But Evelyn wasn't one to be consumed by fear. No, she would fight. She would take back what was hers. The phone in her hand buzzed, and she picked it up without hesitation. Marissa's voice was calm, but with a trace of urgency. "I have something." Evelyn's fingers gripped the edge of her desk. Go ahead. The funds, Marissa said, her voice clicking into a more formal tone. They went into an offshore account. But here's the kicker. It's linked to a company I've never seen before. I dug a little deeper. The company's registered under a name that's unsettling. Evelyn's stomach tightened. What do you mean, unsettling? It's tied to someone from your past, Marissa continued. Robert's old business partner. The one who vanished after that scandal. Evelyn felt her blood run cold. Adam Horn. She hadn't thought about him in years. A name that had haunted their marriage, a shadow from the past. The partnership that had crumbled after Horn's shady dealings left Robert bankrupt and disillusioned. Robert had promised her he'd severed ties with him. But the truth was, Evelyn never fully trusted the man. And now, here he was, like a ghost rising from the ashes, dragging Charlotte along with him. She sat back in her chair, her mind spinning. Could Charlotte really have aligned herself with Horn? Had she been playing her own game all along, manipulating the strings from behind the scenes? A chill swept over Evelyn. Charlotte's thirst for control wasn't new, but this was a step further, a dangerous one. Marissa, I need you to dig deeper. Find out everything you can about this company. I want every connection, every transaction, every scrap of information. On it, Marissa replied. But Evelyn, you're right to be worried. This isn't just a betrayal. It's a full-blown power play. As the call ended, Evelyn stood and paced the study, her thoughts churning. Charlotte wasn't just after money. She had connected herself to a man Evelyn despised, someone whose influence was more far-reaching than Robert had ever been willing to admit. The stakes had just escalated. She felt a surge of determination. Evelyn had spent decades building her empire. This trust fund, her wealth, wasn't just a financial asset. It was the foundation of her independence, her legacy. No one, not even her own daughter, would tear it down without a fight. But her thoughts kept circling back to Charlotte's face during that dinner, her calm, dismissive demeanor. Evelyn had always thought of her as her daughter, her flesh and blood. But now, Charlotte was a stranger to her. The girl who had once idolized her now saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Evelyn's phone buzzed again. It was a text from Paul, the private investigator she'd hired the day after discovering the theft. He had been trailing Charlotte, digging into her contacts, uncovering the connections that lay hidden beneath the surface. The text was simple but chilling. Charlotte's been meeting with Horn. Regularly. The room seemed to spin for a moment, and Evelyn had to steady herself against the edge of her desk. Charlotte and Adam Horn. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Charlotte had aligned herself with the very man Evelyn had once feared would be her undoing. This wasn't just about money. This was about power, control. Charlotte had gone rogue, and Evelyn was now caught in the wake of a storm that was beyond her control. Evelyn's mind raced. She had underestimated her daughter. She had given Charlotte far too much freedom, trusted her when she shouldn't have. Now, Charlotte had crossed a line, and Evelyn wasn't sure she could forgive her. The sharp ring of the doorbell cut through the silence, jolting Evelyn out of her thoughts. She straightened up, trying to mask the fury bubbling inside her. Who could it be? She walked to the front door, her hand tight on the knob, and opened it without a second thought. Charlotte stood there, looking all too calm, her expression unreadable. She was dressed in something expensive and polished, the kind of image she always presented when she wanted to appear in control. She stepped inside before Evelyn could say anything, her eyes scanning the room like she had every right to be there. "Mom," Charlotte began, her voice soft, almost too smooth. "I wanted to talk." Evelyn's chest tightened. "I think we've done enough talking." Charlotte's eyes flicked to Evelyn's hand, still gripping the door handle, and then back to her face. "I know you're upset," she said, her voice laced with a mix of condescension and something darker. "But you don't need to get so dramatic. Everything's going to be fine." Evelyn stepped back, allowing Charlotte to enter. But her mind was far from calm. She was no longer looking at her daughter. She was looking at a woman who had betrayed her trust, who had taken everything Evelyn had worked for and ripped it apart. "What's going on, Charlotte?" Evelyn asked, her voice low, controlled, though it shook with barely contained rage. "What have you really been doing? With Adam Horn? With the trust fund?" Charlotte blinked slowly, her expression not one of guilt, but of cold calculation. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her lips curling into a false smile. "I just want what's mine. Is that really so hard to understand?" The words stung. Evelyn had never heard her daughter speak with such detached cruelty. "You think this is yours?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You think you can just take everything I've built? You think I'm just going to let you get away with it?" Charlotte didn't flinch. If anything, her smile widened. "I didn't steal anything, Mom. I just made sure I was prepared for the future. You should have done the same." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a deep, cold resolve settle in her chest. The girl standing in front of her was no longer her daughter. She was a threat. "You've made a huge mistake," Evelyn said, her voice icy. "And I'm going to make sure you regret it." Charlotte's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Evelyn had her. The game was on. Evelyn stood in the quiet of the study, the weight of the confrontation she was about to have pressing down on her like an iron fist. The calm before the storm felt hollow, like a prelude to something she knew would change everything. She had always prided herself on being the kind of woman who could handle anything. But what Charlotte had done, what she had become, was something that shook her to her very core. The doorbell rang again, its sound now a cruel reminder of what was coming. Evelyn didn't wait for Charlotte to knock. She opened the door with a steady hand, no hesitation. Charlotte stood there, still with that polished composure, as if nothing had happened. But Evelyn was no longer fooled by her daughter's mask of calm. "You wanted to talk, Charlotte?" Evelyn said, her voice low and controlled, barely concealing the storm inside her. "Then let's talk. But this time, it's on my terms." Charlotte's eyes flicked around the room, taking in the stillness of the mansion. The grandness of it all seemed to make her seem even more out of place, her entitlement practically radiating from her. But Evelyn wasn't here to feel sorry for her. This was it. The moment where the lies would be exposed. Charlotte's tone shifted to one of feigned indifference. "What's this about, Mom? You're looking at me like I've done something wrong." Evelyn stepped aside, allowing Charlotte to enter. The moment the door shut behind them, the space between them seemed to shrink, the air thick with the tension that had been building for days. Evelyn reached for the folder on her desk, the one she'd been holding onto for dear life ever since Marissa had delivered the damning evidence. She opened it slowly, savoring the quiet shock that flashed across Charlotte's face as she saw the documents laid out before her. The foreign bank account, the transfers, all of it. "You know exactly what this is?" Evelyn said, her voice a calm, cutting whisper. "The trust fund, the withdrawals, the offshore account. This is you." "Charlotte." Charlotte's eyes darted to the papers, then back to her mother. But she didn't flinch. She couldn't. Not in front of Evelyn. "I don't know what you're talking about," Charlotte said, her voice smooth, the lies coming easy. "Someone must have stolen the money. Maybe it was hacked or something. I didn't touch it." Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Don't insult me. I've seen the evidence. The transfers went to a company tied to Adam Horn, Robert's old business partner. The same man you've been meeting with, The one you've been plotting with behind my back. Charlotte's lips curled, but she didn't back down. You're blowing this out of proportion. Adam Horn has nothing to do with this. I didn't steal anything. Maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe you're reading too much into things. A cold wave of betrayal washed over Evelyn, but she didn't let it show. She wouldn't let Charlotte see the cracks in her armor. Not yet. This isn't a coincidence, Evelyn said, her voice steely with control. This is a pattern. You've been planning this. You've been lying to me for God knows how long. Charlotte stiffened, her composure faltering ever so slightly. I haven't lied about anything, she snapped. You just don't get it. You've always had everything. I deserve a chance to have something too. Evelyn's chest tightened, but she refused to let it break her. You think this is about money? You think this is about something you deserve? She shook her head. This is about control, Charlotte. This is about you trying to destroy everything I've worked for. And you're going to pay for it. The words hung in the air between them, cold and unyielding. Charlotte was silent for a moment, but Evelyn could see the anger building in her eyes, the way her fingers twitched as if she wanted to reach for something. Anything. To fight back. But Evelyn had already seen through the game. I'm not done, Evelyn said, the words clipped. I'm going to freeze your access to the trust fund. You won't see a dime from it. Ever. Not a penny. Charlotte's face twisted into something dark, her eyes flashing with resentment. You can't do that. You're my mother. I can, and I will, Evelyn snapped. And if you think I'm going to let you walk away from this without facing the consequences, you're gravely mistaken. Charlotte's lips parted in disbelief. But she didn't have the words to counteract the finality in Evelyn's voice. She had gone too far. But as Evelyn turned her back to grab her phone, ready to contact Marissa and take the next step in their legal battle, Charlotte's voice sliced through the silence. You'll regret this, Charlotte spat, her voice cold and venomous. You'll regret ever turning your back on me, and when this is all over, you'll see who the real villain is. Evelyn paused, her hand gripping the phone tighter. For a brief, fleeting moment, she felt the weight of those words sink into her skin. Regret? No. This wasn't about regret. This was about survival. This was about her future. And she wasn't going to let Charlotte or anyone else dictate it for her. You want to play this game? Evelyn said, her voice low and hard. Then let's play. But know this. There's no turning back now. Charlotte's expression twisted into a sneer, but Evelyn didn't give her the satisfaction of watching her break. She didn't have time for that. The game had already begun, and Evelyn wasn't about to lose. As Charlotte stormed out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, Evelyn stood there, resolute. She wasn't just protecting her wealth. She was protecting herself. And no one, least of all her daughter, was going to take that from her. The fight had just begun. Evelyn sat at her desk, the pile of documents before her feeling heavier with every passing minute. She had always prided herself on her ability to handle anything: business deals, family crises, the weight of expectations. But now, as she sifted through the new evidence, her own daughter's betrayal hit harder than any outside enemy. Charlotte had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and the reality of it, the cold, hard proof, was staring her in the face. The private investigator had uncovered more than she'd hoped. Charlotte's dealings with Adam Horn had been far more extensive than Evelyn had imagined. Not only had Charlotte been siphoning funds from the trust fund, but she had also been setting up shell companies, one after another, all linked to Horn's network. It was clear now. Charlotte hadn't been after money alone. She had been orchestrating a complete takeover, trying to control everything Evelyn had worked for. The empire Evelyn had built with blood, sweat, and tears was being dismantled from within, piece by piece, by the one person she thought she could trust most. Her hand trembled as she reached for the glass of water on her desk. But it was no use. She couldn't shake the sense of betrayal that gnawed at her insides. The trust, the love she'd poured into Charlotte. Had it all been a lie? The phone rang, jerking her from her thoughts. She glanced at the caller ID, Robert, her ex-husband. She hesitated. The last thing she needed right now was another round of him playing the passive, avoidant husband who pretended everything would magically resolve itself. But the truth was, she had no choice. They were tied together in this mess whether she liked it or not. Evelyn, Robert's voice came through, weak and uncertain as always. We need to talk about Charlotte. She's upset. She says you've gone too far. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. He was still defending Charlotte. Still pretending there was some innocence in her actions. I don't care how upset she is, Evelyn said, her voice tight with restraint. What she's done isn't just wrong, it's criminal. She's been taking from me, Robert. She's been setting up accounts, transferring money into foreign banks, and working with Adam Horn to take everything I've built. There was a long silence on the other end. She could almost hear him digesting the words, trying to reconcile this new reality with the one he'd been living in, a reality where Charlotte could do no wrong. You're overreacting, Evelyn, Robert finally said, his voice carrying that all-too-familiar tone of reluctance. Charlotte didn't mean any harm. She's just trying to secure her future. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, a hot rage rising in her chest. Her future? Robert, you're not listening. She's been systematically trying to take everything from me, and now she's pretending to be the victim. She's trying to manipulate you into believing she's innocent. You need to wake up. Robert's sigh was audible, a mix of guilt and defeat. I'm just saying, maybe it's not as bad as it seems. Evelyn set the phone down hard, her breath coming in sharp bursts. Maybe it's not as bad as it seems? Was he really still this blind? Still playing the role of the passive observer while his daughter plotted her rise? The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She couldn't rely on Robert anymore. Not for support, not for anything. Their marriage, if it could even be called that, had ended years ago. But this was something else entirely. This was a betrayal on a different level. She had always tried to protect him, tried to protect their family from the fallout of their divorce. But it was clear now. She had been doing it alone, and that had to end. She couldn't carry him anymore, couldn't keep pretending everything was okay when their entire foundation was crumbling. Evelyn took a deep breath, steadying herself. If she was going to confront Robert, really confront him, it had to be now. He needed to see what Charlotte had done, needed to understand the full extent of the damage. She gathered the files again, the weight of them sinking in even further. As she dialed Robert's number to arrange a meeting, the cold realization hit her again. This wasn't just about the trust fund. This wasn't just about Charlotte's greed. This was about family, about a daughter who had betrayed her, and a husband who had never been there to begin with. When Robert arrived, he looked even more fragile than usual, his shoulders hunched, his eyes tired from a lifetime of evasion. Evelyn stood in front of him, holding the files, her face hard as stone. She wasn't going to let him make excuses this time. "Sit down," she commanded, and Robert did so without a word. Evelyn laid the documents out between them, spreading the damning evidence in front of him. She could see his eyes flicker as he processed what was before him, but there was no shock, no recognition of the gravity of the situation. "Do you see this?" Evelyn's voice was icy now, unforgiving. "Do you understand what's been happening under your nose? Charlotte has been manipulating you, just like she's been manipulating me. She's been trying to take my empire. Our empire. Robert." He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the old passivity creeping back into his voice. "Evelyn, this is a lot to take in. I just— No. Evelyn cut him off, her voice rising. You just don't get it, do you? You've never gotten it. You've always let her do whatever she wanted. And now, look at what she's done. This isn't just about the money, Robert. This is about everything I've built, everything I've worked for. And you've let her tear it apart. A brief flicker of guilt passed through Robert's eyes, but it was too little, too late. Evelyn could feel the walls between them growing thicker, the cracks in their relationship widening beyond repair. I can't keep pretending this is going to work, Evelyn said, her voice calm but unyielding. I can't keep protecting you, or her. I'm done. Robert opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Evelyn had already made up her mind. She had to protect herself now. She couldn't afford to keep carrying the weight of a broken family. I'm going to do what I have to do, Evelyn said, her voice low, resolute. And you can stay or go. But this is over. As Robert left, his shoulders slumped, Evelyn knew there was no turning back. The foundation she had spent her entire life building was crumbling, and the choices she made now would define the rest of her life. But she wasn't afraid. Evelyn Harper was done playing the role of the martyr. The time for protecting everyone else had ended. The fight for her legacy had only just begun. And she would be the one to come out on top. The storm was only starting, and Evelyn was ready to face it. The morning after Robert left, Evelyn stood in front of the mirror in her private study, looking at the woman she had become. Her reflection was sharper, harder, but in her eyes, there was something new, something that had always been buried beneath the weight of her past: resolve. This was no longer about salvaging the remains of her marriage or protecting the fragile balance of family dynamics. This was war. She walked briskly to her desk where the phone sat, waiting. She had no time to dwell on the emotional aftermath. Charlotte's betrayal wasn't just a personal wound. It was an attack on everything Evelyn had built. And no one, least of all her daughter, was going to get away with it. Evelyn made the calls she'd been planning for weeks. First, to Marissa. I want everything frozen, her access, her funds, everything. We'll start with the trust fund and work our way from there. Marissa didn't hesitate. I'll take care of it, Evelyn. But be prepared for pushback. This will get ugly. I'm ready, Evelyn replied, her voice as cold as the steel in her spine. Next, she reached out to contacts who owed her favors. People she had helped over the years. Lawyers, investors, old friends who now needed to pay their dues. She had long since learned that in this world, loyalty could be bought, but respect could only be earned, and she had earned both in spades. Make it happen, she said to one of her former associates, her tone flat and commanding. I want the accounts in order by the end of the week. With each call, each arrangement she made, Evelyn felt herself shedding layers of the woman she had been. The one who had always tried to keep the peace. The one who had kept silent for the sake of appearances. That Evelyn was gone, replaced by someone who would stop at nothing to protect herself. Meanwhile, Charlotte's texts and phone calls flooded in, each one more desperate than the last. At first, they were tearful, pleading for Evelyn's forgiveness. I'm sorry, Mom, please. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I'll change. We can fix this together. Please don't cut me off. But as the hours passed and Evelyn refused to engage, the messages shifted. The tone turned sharp, accusatory, bitter. You're making a mistake. I'm your daughter. You'll regret this. I'll make sure you regret it. Evelyn didn't flinch. She read each one, but she didn't respond. The silence was her answer. She had made the decision. Charlotte was no longer her daughter. She was a threat, a betrayal that could not be undone. As Evelyn sat back in her chair, a sense of finality settled over her. It was done. The ties had been severed. She had made sure of that. Now it was time to focus on securing her future, her legacy. Robert's absence felt like a weight lifted from her shoulders. His passivity, his refusal to take a stand, had always been a constant source of frustration. And now, in his place, there was only space for clarity. But even that clarity wasn't without cost. The mansion felt empty now, more so than ever. The silence that filled the house wasn't just from Charlotte's departure. It was the sound of the family Evelyn had fought so hard to protect unraveling. She had spent years trying to hold it together, to shield them from the fallout of their fractured past. But now, the truth was clear. The damage was done. The weight of the decision was heavy on her chest, but it was also a weight she could bear. She wasn't a woman to be trifled with. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let anyone take what was rightfully hers. And if Charlotte couldn't see that, then it was her loss. As the days passed, Evelyn dove deeper into the restructuring of her finances. She worked with Marissa, ensuring that every asset was protected, every account was secured. The trust fund, what had once been a symbol of her love and care for Charlotte, was now a fortress, impenetrable to anyone who dared breach it. Each step Evelyn took felt like reclaiming a piece of her own soul. She was no longer just a mother or a wife or a businesswoman. She was a force, determined, unstoppable. This was no longer about the money. It was about her dignity, her control, her future. One afternoon, as she reviewed the final touches on her financial plans, the phone buzzed again. It was another message from Charlotte. This one was short, but it made Evelyn pause. "You've destroyed everything. There's no coming back from this." The words stung, but only for a second. Evelyn's lips curled into a tight smile. "Maybe," she murmured to herself, "but I'll be the one who's standing when the dust settles." And that was the truth. Charlotte might have thought she could destroy everything Evelyn had built, but in the end, it was Evelyn who would rise from the ashes, stronger and more determined than ever. The game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Evelyn Harper had spent her entire life building an empire, and she was done letting anyone, even her own blood, take it from her. The facade had been destroyed, and the real battle was just beginning. The days that followed were a blur of relentless messages, emails, and calls from Charlotte. She was like a storm that wouldn't stop, each communication more desperate than the last. At first, they were filled with tearful apologies, promises of change, and pleas for forgiveness. But as Evelyn remained steadfast, the tone of Charlotte's messages shifted. "Mom, please. This isn't you. You know I never meant for it to go this far. We can fix this. I'll change, I swear. You'll regret this. You have no idea what you've done. You're making a mistake. I'll fight you. I'll take you to court if I have to." Evelyn read each one, feeling a brief pang in her chest, but it wasn't for her daughter. It was the same old manipulation, the same old game. The messages were no longer a cry for help. They were an attempt to regain control. But Evelyn was done playing that game. She sat at her desk, the weight of Charlotte's words bearing down on her, but not breaking her. The silence in the house was suffocating, but it was the silence Evelyn had chosen. She knew that engaging with Charlotte would only give her power. It would show weakness. And for the first time in years, Evelyn was no longer afraid of looking ruthless. Marissa had been clear. The more you respond, the more power you give Charlotte. Let your legal team handle it. This is bigger than you, and you need to remain calm. It's the only way to win. And so, Evelyn didn't respond. The phone calls became less frequent, but they still came, grief-stricken, angry, pleading. Still, Evelyn remained resolute in her silence. She couldn't give Charlotte the satisfaction of drawing her back into the emotional vortex. She wouldn't let herself be manipulated anymore. But even as Evelyn held firm, the pressure from the outside world started to intensify. Marissa had warned her. The press is going to get involved. They'll want to know why you've cut ties with your daughter. They'll spin it however they want. Sure enough, the media caught wind of the family's unraveling, and before long, the headlines appeared. Billionaire businesswoman cuts ties with daughter over trust fund scandal. Evelyn Harper's family drama, the price of betrayal. Evelyn didn't flinch as she watched the headlines scroll by. She knew how this game worked. The media was like a hungry animal, always searching for the next scandal, the next piece of drama. Charlotte, predictably, used the press to her advantage, painting herself as the victim. Why would my mother do this to me? I've always loved her. I don't understand why she's treating me this way. The articles were filled with quotes from Charlotte, her face a mask of wounded innocence, casting Evelyn as the villain. Her image was crafted to draw sympathy, to make her seem like the loving daughter betrayed by a cold, calculating mother. But Evelyn was no fool. She saw through the manipulation and the media circus. She knew exactly what Charlotte was doing. She was trying to rewrite the narrative, to paint herself as the one wronged in all of this. But Evelyn refused to engage. She wasn't going to give Charlotte, or the press, what they wanted. Instead, Evelyn took a different route. She called her public relations team and released a short, carefully worded statement. After much reflection, I have made the difficult decision to sever ties with my daughter, Charlotte Harper. The trust and betrayal I've experienced have reached a point where reconciliation is no longer possible. This is a private matter, and I ask for my family's privacy to be respected. The words were firm, concise, dignified. There was no need for more. She had said what needed to be said, and now the ball was in Charlotte's court. The press didn't let up. They hounded her for more details, seeking a deeper story, a bigger scandal. But Evelyn didn't give them the satisfaction. Her statement was all they were going to get. Each day that passed, Charlotte's public image crumbled further. The media had fed into her attempts to play the victim, but the more she tried to manipulate the narrative, the more transparent her actions became. Evelyn knew that the public would soon see through it. They always did. Charlotte's desperation was plain to see, and the more she tried to control the story, the more she lost her grip on it. As the noise around her grew louder, Evelyn grew quieter. She watched as Charlotte's behavior spiraled, her desperate need for attention becoming her downfall. But Evelyn remained unmoved, steady in her silence. She had learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful thing a person could do was nothing at all. Silence was her weapon now. She leaned back in her chair, the cool calm of the room surrounding her. The house felt less empty, less suffocating. The absence of Charlotte, of Robert, was like a clearing in the storm. Evelyn had reclaimed her space, both literally and emotionally, and though the battle wasn't over, she could already feel the shift. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was about her own survival. She had fought for too long to be seen as weak, to be seen as someone who could be pushed around. The game had changed, and Evelyn had become the player who would control it all. As she stared out the window, the weight of the world seemed to lift from her shoulders. She had broken the facade, and now the real fight could begin. No more apologies, no more manipulation. Just the unyielding force of a woman who had finally taken control of her own story. And no one, least of all Charlotte, could take that away from her. The truth about Charlotte had been slowly, but surely, dragged into the public eye. The media, once captivated by her tale of betrayal and heartbreak, now turned on her with a ferocity that was unmistakable. The narrative had shifted. Charlotte's manipulations, her ties to Adam Horn, and her systematic attempts to tear apart Evelyn's life, everything had been exposed. The woman who once played the victim was now the villain, and the public was quick to show their disgust. Each headline felt like a victory for Evelyn, But it was a hollow one. She wasn't celebrating. Instead, she watched in silence as the pieces of Charlotte's world crumbled, one by one. Her daughter's friends, her allies, had begun to pull away. The people who had once supported her now distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone so transparently manipulative. Even Charlotte's publicists, once eager to spin her story, were abandoning her. Evelyn stood in front of her private office windows, the skyline of the city sprawling out before her. It was an oddly fitting metaphor for her life now, a vista of success, of opportunity, yet with something dark lingering on the edges. She had won the war. Her empire remained intact. But the cost had been steep. Charlotte's betrayal had taken more from her than she cared to admit. The phone buzzed on the desk. It was Robert. Again. Her ex-husband's voice was always the same, hesitant, trying to put on a brave face but always falling short. "Evelyn, I'm just trying to understand what happened. You've got to know that Charlotte didn't mean for any of this to spiral out of control. She's confused. She's young." Evelyn cut him off, her voice calm but tinged with something deeper now. "Don't protect her anymore, Robert. The truth is out there. She's not the victim in this. She's a liar. And you've been complicit in this for far too long." There was silence on the other end before Robert's voice cracked. I just don't know what to do." "Neither do I," Evelyn replied, her words almost a whisper. "But this family, whatever it was, is gone. It's over." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I'm so sorry." But those words were empty. Evelyn had heard them before, in 100 different contexts. She wasn't looking for an apology anymore. She was looking for something else. Something she had lost in the years of trying to hold everything together. Peace. She hung up the phone without another word. The truth was, she had lost more than just money. She had lost the family she had worked so hard to protect. Charlotte had been her heart, her pride, the one thing she thought she could rely on. And now, all that was left was the wreckage of a relationship that had never truly been solid. She had built an empire. But at what cost? The walls around her heart had become just as impenetrable as the fortress she had created around her wealth. But unlike her wealth, the family she had once tried to protect was now gone. Charlotte was lost to her, and Robert had never truly been there. The realization hit Evelyn hard as she stared at her reflection in the window. She wasn't just grieving the loss of a daughter. She was grieving the version of herself that had thought family could be the anchor in her chaotic world. She had sacrificed so much, yet it had all been for nothing. And yet, in that moment, Evelyn made a decision. She couldn't stay here anymore. Not in this house that held so many ghosts, so many painful memories of a family that had disintegrated under the weight of betrayal. The mansion, once a symbol of her triumph, now felt like a prison, a reminder of everything she had lost. She would leave. She needed to leave. The thought of starting over, of stepping away from the life she had built here, was both terrifying and liberating. But she knew deep down that it was the only way forward. She didn't need the mansion. She didn't need the facade of a perfect family. What she needed was space. Space to rebuild, to find herself again, away from the toxic ties that had bound her to a past that could no longer define her future. Later that afternoon, Evelyn began the process of moving. She packed only what was essential, the few things that truly mattered to her now. Her business documents, a few personal items, and a few photographs that reminded her of the woman she used to be before the weight of expectations had worn her down. The moving company came and went, but Evelyn didn't linger to watch them load her life into boxes. She simply turned her back on it all, as if shedding the remnants of a past that no longer fit her. The new space, smaller and more intimate, was a stark contrast to the sprawling mansion, but it was hers. Clean, quiet, and free of the noise that had once consumed her. As she sat on the couch in her new apartment, a rare silence filled the room. She allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had spent so long protecting everyone else, her daughter, her ex-husband, her legacy, that she had forgotten to protect herself. But now, she was doing just that. Evelyn Harper was no longer the woman who had sacrificed herself for the sake of a family that never truly existed. She was something else now. Someone new. Someone who would no longer allow the ghosts of her past to control her future. The storm wasn't over, but Evelyn was no longer afraid of it. She was finally free. And the next chapter of her life had just begun. The phone call from Marissa hit Evelyn like a tidal wave. Her lawyer's voice, calm but urgent, cracked through the silence of her new apartment. "Evelyn, we need to talk. Charlotte's hired one of the top firms in town. The battle for the inheritance is about to get a lot messier." Evelyn didn't blink. She had expected this. Charlotte's desperation had been building ever since Evelyn froze her out, and now, the fight had moved into the legal arena. But this? This was more than just about money. It was about control. And Evelyn had a lot to lose. The situation had become clearer to Evelyn as she looked at the phone in her hand, the weight of the battle ahead pressing on her chest. Charlotte had crossed every line. She had gone from manipulative daughter to adversary, and now she was using the full force of the law to try to tear Evelyn's world apart. Evelyn had fought harder than anyone could imagine to build this empire. And now, the one person she had trusted most, the one person she thought she could count on, was poised to take it from her. The thought alone filled her with a cold rage. "I won't let her take it all," Evelyn muttered to herself. She'd fought for every inch of her success, and she wasn't going to let Charlotte or anyone else strip it away. Marissa's voice broke through her thoughts. "Evelyn, this is going to be a drawn-out battle. We need to prepare for a war, and it's not going to be pretty. Charlotte won't back down. She has nothing left to lose." Evelyn nodded, even though Marissa couldn't see her. "I'm ready," she said, the words feeling like a promise to herself as much as to Marissa. She wasn't just ready for this fight, she was determined to win it, no matter the cost. As Evelyn hung up, she felt the weight of her decisions bearing down on her. She had spent her entire life building her wealth, her reputation, and her legacy. And now it was all on the line. The very people she had sacrificed everything for were turning against her. It was as if every piece of her life was unraveling at once. Robert's passive nature had always been a source of frustration for Evelyn, but now, his failure to stand up for her was proving to be more than just an inconvenience. Evelyn had always been the one to hold the family together, but now, even he was playing into Charlotte's hands. Charlotte was playing Robert like a puppet. Evelyn could see it in the way he responded to her. First, the guilt, Charlotte's tears and pleas, and then the pressure, the subtle nudging to choose her side. Robert, ever the passive figure, always tried to stay neutral, but neutrality was becoming a dangerous game. By failing to make a stand, he was feeding into Charlotte's narrative, painting Evelyn as the villain. Evelyn knew what was coming. Robert would eventually be forced to take a side, and that side would likely be Charlotte's. It wasn't just about money, it was about his own guilt and his inability to face the reality of what had happened to their family. He would crumble under the pressure. Evelyn had no illusions anymore. Charlotte was playing the game for keeps, and she would stop at nothing to win. She could already feel the oncoming storm, the storm of legal papers and threats of public exposure. The media would be all over it, turning the fight for the trust fund into a circus. And Robert? He'd be caught in the middle, torn between guilt and manipulation. But Evelyn would not bend. She wouldn't let her legacy slip away simply because of her daughter's actions. She would fight back. She would do whatever it took. As she sat at her desk, going over legal documents with Marissa, Evelyn felt the full weight of what was coming. Charlotte wasn't just fighting for money anymore. She was fighting for her own sense of entitlement. But Evelyn was no stranger to battles, and she wasn't about to lose this one. Marissa's voice was steady, but there was a sharp edge to it now. This is going to get ugly. Charlotte will use every tactic in the book. She'll manipulate the media, pull at the heartstrings, make you seem like the villain in this story. You need to stay focused. Don't let the emotions cloud your judgment. This fight is about more than just money. It's about your entire future. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the pen in her hand. The words stung, but she wasn't scared. She'd been through worse. She had been betrayed by her own daughter. But this time, she wasn't going to let the world paint her as the bad guy. She would control the narrative. "I know what I'm up against," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "And I'll take whatever comes. But I'm not backing down. Not this time." The reality of the legal battle was settling in. It would be long, draining, and brutal. But Evelyn knew one thing. She was prepared to go the distance. Charlotte had pushed her too far, and now it was time for her to pay the price. As the days passed and the media frenzy grew, Evelyn remained resolute. She wasn't going to let the world tell her story. She was going to write it herself. And the first chapter was going to be one where she came out on top. Charlotte's desperation would only fuel Evelyn's resolve. She had been pushed to the edge, but she was still standing. The fight for her legacy, for everything she had worked for, was only just beginning. And Evelyn Harper was ready to do whatever it took to win. Evelyn sat at her desk, her hands gripping the edge of the table as she reviewed the documents before her. This was it. The moment where the game would change. She wasn't going to wait any longer. Charlotte had crossed every line, and now Evelyn was going to make her move. The fight for her legacy was far from over, but it was time to take control. With steady hands, Evelyn signed the legal documents Marissa had prepared, freezing Charlotte's access to any future assets from the trust. The motion was clear. No more games, no more manipulation. This was not just about securing her wealth, it was about reclaiming her dignity. Evelyn had fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to let anyone, especially her daughter, tear it all down. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper was the only noise in the room as Evelyn sealed her resolve. She wasn't backing down. Not this time. Her phone buzzed on the desk, an incoming call. It was from Charlotte's lawyer. Evelyn had expected this, and now it was time to stand firm. She picked up the phone, her voice calm but steely. "Yes? Ms. Zarkte, Harper?" The lawyer's voice came through, smooth but with a hint of frustration. "We've reviewed the documents you filed. We're advising you to reconsider. The actions you've taken, freezing the trust and denying Charlotte access, are aggressive and completely unnecessary. We believe this is only going to escalate the situation." Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she didn't let the lawyer's tone rattle her. "I'm not reconsidering," she replied, her voice unwavering. "I'm protecting what's mine. If you want to take this to court, then so be it. But you should know, I won't be intimidated." There was a pause on the other end before the lawyer spoke again, clearly trying to regain control of the conversation. "This could all be resolved quietly if you're willing to negotiate. We still believe there's a chance to avoid a public battle." Evelyn's lips curled into a thin smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm done negotiating. Tell Charlotte that, and tell her this. There's no going back from this. She made her choices." She hung up the phone before he could respond, a weight lifting off her shoulders. For once, Evelyn wasn't afraid of what would come next. The media frenzy, the legal battle. It would be intense. But she was prepared for it. The press was already turning its focus back to the drama, spinning the story in every direction they could. But Evelyn refused to engage directly. She knew how this worked. Charlotte was trying to paint her as the villain, the greedy mother who had cut her daughter off. But Evelyn knew better. She had learned the power of silence. Instead of responding directly, she had her lawyer release a public statement on her behalf. It was short, measured, and firm. My actions are not motivated by greed or malice, but by the need to protect my legacy. What's been done to me by my own flesh and blood goes beyond any reasonable limits. My peace is what I'm fighting for, and I will not let anyone destroy what I've worked my entire life to build. The statement was clear. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about revenge. It was about peace. Her peace. But even as the statement went public, Evelyn knew Charlotte would continue to escalate. The media was eating up the narrative of the estranged mother and daughter, and Charlotte had every intention of keeping the spotlight on her. As Evelyn moved forward with her legal team, she started looking deeper into Charlotte's finances. She knew there had to be more. There had to be something else Charlotte had hidden. The trust fund was just the beginning. Evelyn's instincts had been right. Charlotte had been scheming for years. When the first batch of financial records came back, Evelyn found more than she had bargained for. Hidden transactions, offshore accounts, and shell companies all tied back to Charlotte's dealings with Adam Horn. But there was something more. Something that sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. A series of wire transfers, small but consistent, made to an account Evelyn didn't recognize. It was a backdoor deal. A plan to siphon away more than just her money. It was about taking control, about undermining Evelyn at every turn. The evidence was irrefutable. Evelyn's heart pounded as she processed the documents. Charlotte had been preparing for this moment for a long time, building a network of financial secrecy and manipulation, pulling at strings Evelyn couldn't even see until now. "Marissa," Evelyn said, her voice colder than ice. "I need you to prepare for everything. This goes beyond the trust fund. I have evidence that Charlotte has been undermining me for years. We need to move quickly." "Understood," Marissa replied, her tone now matching Evelyn's in its no-nonsense sharpness. "We'll be ready. But this won't be easy. Charlotte will fight back hard. She'll try to turn every public perception against you." Evelyn stood up, her hands gripping the edge of her desk. She wasn't going to be the victim. Not again. She had been through too much to let this slip through her fingers now. The battle was escalating, but this time, Evelyn wasn't going to play defense. She would be the one making the moves, controlling the game. She was going to fight back, harder, faster, and smarter than Charlotte ever could. As the documents spread out before her, Evelyn realized something crucial. The real war had just begun, and she wasn't going to stop until she'd won. The cracks were beginning to show in Charlotte's case. And Evelyn Harper was ready to exploit every single one of them. Evelyn stood at the entrance of her new apartment, the cool air rushing in as she opened the door to the unmistakable sound of a car pulling up outside. Her heart tightened as she knew exactly who was arriving. Charlotte. The past weeks had been filled with silence, but now the battle had reached its climax. The media had turned their attention to the escalating war between mother and daughter, but this would be a confrontation unlike any other. It was the moment of truth, the moment when Charlotte would show her hand, and Evelyn was ready. She walked to the door and opened it, her posture tall, her expression unreadable. Charlotte stood there, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. The once pristine image Evelyn had once been proud of was now marred by desperation. Charlotte looked like a woman who had lost everything, but Evelyn wasn't fooled. Beneath the tears was a cold, calculated ambition. "Mom, please," Charlotte whispered, her voice trembling. She stepped inside, moving toward Evelyn with an intensity that bordered on pleading. "Please, I know I've made mistakes. I never meant for it to go this far. I'm sorry. We can fix this. I I need what's rightfully mine. Evelyn's eyes narrowed as she listened, a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling up inside her. Her own daughter, standing before her, attempting to pull her back into the emotional chaos she had so carefully distanced herself from. Charlotte's tears were nothing but a weapon, a tool to manipulate her one last time. "I'm not here to apologize for what I've done," Charlotte continued, her voice gaining strength. "I'm here to tell you that you're making a mistake. This wealth, this legacy, it's my birthright. You owe me." Evelyn's jaw tightened. Birthright? It was a word that echoed in her mind, a word that made the bile rise in her throat. Charlotte had convinced herself that she was entitled to everything Evelyn had worked for, as though her existence alone justified the theft, the lies, the manipulation. "No, Charlotte," Evelyn replied, her voice sharp and unwavering. "You don't deserve anything, not after what you've done." Charlotte flinched at the words, but she quickly recovered. "I was only trying to secure my future. You should understand that. You've always been about control. You've always been the one in charge. But you're leaving me with nothing." Evelyn's gaze never wavered as Charlotte's words sank in. She wasn't just fighting for money, she was fighting for her identity, for the right to be seen as more than just a daughter seeking inheritance. It was a battle of egos, of wills, but it was also about something much deeper. Charlotte had failed to see that Evelyn had built everything from nothing. It wasn't a birthright, it was a legacy, earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. "You're wrong," Evelyn said softly, her voice thick with emotion, though her eyes were as cold as steel. "You don't get it, Charlotte. This isn't just about money. It's about what you've done to me, to our family. You've poisoned everything we had, and you can't just erase it with some apology. You've crossed a line that can never be uncrossed." Charlotte's face hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line. The facade of vulnerability cracked. And the ruthless ambition Evelyn had seen all along surfaced. "I never wanted to hurt you," Charlotte said, her tone shifting, turning defensive. "I just want what's mine. You've always kept it all from me. Do you really think I'm wrong for wanting a future of my own? You have everything. Why can't I have what's mine?" Evelyn took a deep breath, forcing the hurt to the back of her mind. She had heard enough of these excuses. Charlotte's self-pity, her sense of entitlement. It was all a carefully crafted act designed to sway Evelyn's heart. But Evelyn had nothing left to give. "Do you remember what you said to me, Charlotte?" Evelyn's voice was low, barely a whisper, but the words landed like a punch. "Your death would be the best gift to me. Then I'd inherit everything. Do you remember saying that?" Charlotte's eyes widened, and for the first time in their confrontation she faltered. The words that had once seemed like a careless joke now came crashing back, vivid and real. "I never—" Charlotte began, but her voice trailed off as the weight of her words pressed down on her. Evelyn stepped closer, her gaze never leaving her daughter's face. "You may not have meant it then, but that's how you feel now, isn't it? That's what you've been planning all along. You thought you could push me out, take everything, and walk away without consequences. You've been lying to me, Charlotte, manipulating me for years." Charlotte's lips trembled as she opened her mouth to respond, but Evelyn held up her hand, silencing her. "This isn't about money. It's about you turning everything we had into a lie. You've stolen my peace, my trust, my family." And that— Evelyn's voice caught, but she didn't let the emotion break her composure. "That is something I can never forgive." There was a long silence between them, the weight of the truth hanging heavily in the room. Charlotte's face was a mask of defiance, but Evelyn could see the cracks beginning to show. She had underestimated her mother. She had underestimated the strength Evelyn had always kept hidden beneath the surface. As Evelyn turned away, ready to walk out of the room, a voice from behind her stopped her. "Evelyn." Robert's voice, trembling and weak, called from the doorway. "Please don't do this." Evelyn turned slowly, her heart sinking as she looked at her ex-husband. There he stood, as passive as ever, trying to mediate between the two women he had failed to protect. "No, Robert," Evelyn said, her voice cold and firm. "This is over." It was over the moment Charlotte chose her path. Robert stepped forward, his hand outstretched, but Evelyn held him at arm's length. "I don't need you anymore, Robert," she said, her eyes steely with finality. "Not like this. You were never on my side." With those words, Evelyn turned, walking away, leaving behind a broken family and a battle that would rage on. But she wasn't looking back. She was done fighting for them. Now, she would fight for herself. The court case had reached its boiling point. The legal battle that had dragged on for months was finally nearing its climax, and Evelyn could feel the weight of every decision, every move she'd made, pressing down on her. But this was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. It wasn't about destroying Charlotte, though that might have been part of it. This was about securing her future, protecting everything she had worked for, and reclaiming the dignity that had been stolen from her. Evelyn sat at the center of the courtroom, her posture straight, her gaze fixed ahead. Her lawyer, Marissa, sat beside her, flipping through the evidence they had painstakingly gathered. Paul, the private investigator, had helped them uncover Charlotte's web of lies, the financial manipulations, the hidden accounts, and the deceitful ties to Adam Horn. Evelyn wasn't just going to win this case, she was going to expose the truth in front of everyone, her daughter's betrayal, her calculated schemes, the depths of her manipulation. The judge called for silence as the room fell still. Evelyn's heart beat with a steady rhythm, but her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about power. Who would hold it, and who would lose it all? And Evelyn wasn't going to lose. Not again. Marissa stood, addressing the court with quiet authority. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what we are about to present is not a matter of simple inheritance. It is a matter of trust. Trust that was not just violated but weaponized. My client, Evelyn Harper, has worked her entire life to build a legacy, and this woman," she pointed toward Charlotte sitting across the room, "has spent the last few years systematically dismantling it. Her actions, her lies, her manipulations, they've all been part of an elaborate scheme to take control of what is not hers." Evelyn's gaze flicked to Charlotte, whose face was taut with barely restrained fury. The moment their eyes met, Evelyn felt a sharp, almost physical shift in the air. But she didn't flinch. She had already seen the lies, the manipulation, the cruelty. And now, it was time for the world to see it too. Marissa continued, her voice cold and precise. "We have evidence, documents, wire transfers, financial records that prove Ms. Harper's involvement in fraudulent activities, siphoning funds from the trust and funneling them into foreign accounts. This is not a simple mistake. This is a pattern of behavior designed to take what was never hers." Evelyn watched as Charlotte's lawyer tried to mount a defense, but the words fell flat. Charlotte's facade of innocence, the sympathetic daughter in the media, had been shattered. The courtroom was silent as the truth unfolded, one damning piece of evidence after another. The public, who had once sided with Charlotte, now began to see her in a different light. The media had been quick to paint Evelyn as the villain, but as the facts emerged, the narrative shifted. Charlotte's attempts to sway public opinion, her tearful pleas for sympathy, couldn't withstand the truth. Her allies, the ones who had once rallied around her, began to pull away, leaving her isolated in her desperation. The final blow came when Robert, once so passive, took the stand. His voice was quiet, but there was a tremor in it as he recounted the years of turmoil, his inability to act, his blindness to the betrayal unfolding right in front of him. "I failed Evelyn," Robert said, his voice almost a whisper. "I failed her as a partner and as a father. But what Charlotte has done? I can't stand by that." Charlotte's face turned an ashen gray, her shoulders slumping as the full weight of her actions sank in. She had pushed him. Too. Pushed him to a place where he couldn't deny the truth anymore. When the final ruling came, it was swift. The trust was officially frozen. Charlotte was permanently removed from any claim to the estate. The judge's words rang in Evelyn's ears as she felt a strange, unexpected sense of relief. "The evidence is clear. The trust is protected. Charlotte Harper is no longer entitled to any future access to the assets." The media erupted, flashing cameras capturing the moment. The world would see Charlotte for who she really was now. The daughter who had manipulated, stolen, and lied. But Evelyn felt no satisfaction. Her heart didn't lift at the sight of Charlotte's downfall. Instead, there was a hollow emptiness inside her. She had won, but at what cost? As the court adjourned, Evelyn stood from her seat, walking slowly toward the exit. She could hear Charlotte's lawyer trying to make one last futile appeal, but it didn't matter anymore. The damage had been done. Charlotte had lost everything she had worked for. And Evelyn? She had regained everything she had fought to protect. Outside the courthouse, Evelyn was greeted by the press, microphones thrust in her face, questions firing from every direction. But she didn't flinch. She didn't engage. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of another soundbite, another narrative they could twist. She had said all she needed to say through her actions. "Evelyn," one reporter called out, voice rising above the others, "do you feel any remorse for what's happened to your daughter?" Evelyn stopped, her back straight and her head held high. The silence that followed felt like a weight pressing down on her. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles, to let anyone dictate her future. And now, after everything, after all the pain, the betrayal, she was finally free. "No," Evelyn said simply, her voice firm, her gaze steady. "I've done what was necessary." She turned and walked away, leaving behind the cameras, the questions, the story. She wasn't the villain. She wasn't the victim. She was Evelyn Harper, and she would never let anyone, least of all her own flesh and blood, take what was hers. As she walked into the waiting car, Evelyn allowed herself one final thought. It was over. But the future? That was just beginning. The ruling had been made, the final blow delivered. Charlotte was no longer entitled to anything, and the trust was officially frozen. Evelyn sat at the head of her sleek wooden desk, her fingers lightly tracing the papers before her. The courtroom's echo still rang in her ears, but it was fading. She was alone now, finally alone with her thoughts, with the gravity of what had just transpired. She hadn't expected the relief that came with victory. The weight of the court's decision had settled in her chest, but instead of triumph, it was sorrow that lingered. Evelyn stared out the window of her new apartment, the bustling cityscape beyond her, a reminder of the life she had fought for, the life she had won, but at such an immense cost. Charlotte was gone from her life, completely, forever. The thought should have made Evelyn feel free, but it didn't. Instead, it made her feel empty. She never wanted it to come to this. Not really. She had fought, yes. But she had also hoped, foolishly perhaps, that somehow things could be repaired, that Charlotte would see the error of her ways, that she could find some sliver of the daughter she had once known. But as the days wore on, Evelyn accepted the truth. Charlotte was gone, and with her, a version of Evelyn's past had died too. The fight had been too much. Evelyn had been forced to wage war against the very person she had loved, nurtured, and built a life with. The daughter she had raised had been replaced by a stranger, someone driven by greed, manipulation, and self-interest. She couldn't undo it. She couldn't change the past, but she could move forward. It was time to let go. She had worked tirelessly to rebuild her life. Her empire was intact, her name still strong, but it was no longer just about money or business. It was about reclaiming her peace, her sense of self. The legacy she had once thought she would share with Charlotte was now her own, and she would protect it with everything she had, not for the world, not for anyone else, but for herself. Evelyn turned away from the window, her gaze falling on the sparse furnishings in her new apartment. It was nothing like the mansion. There were no grand chandeliers or sprawling halls, no reminders of the family she had fought so hard to keep together. This place was quiet, calm, a clean slate. Her business had been thriving even through the chaos. There had been meetings, calls, and negotiations in the weeks following the verdict. Evelyn hadn't stopped moving. No, she had chosen to move forward, to build something that was truly hers. Her name, her reputation, her work. It was all that remained now, and she would protect it fiercely. But the weight of it all remained. The emotional toll, the sleepless nights, the endless battles, the personal sacrifices. It had all drained her. Evelyn knew she couldn't let the past define her anymore. But the scars, those would stay. They were part of her story now. She wouldn't hide from them. She had earned the right to be at peace with what she had done and what she had lost. And so, she made a decision. Evelyn would travel, rediscover herself outside the confines of business and legacy. She would take time, breathe deeply, and find joy again in things beyond her wealth and her empire. There was more to life than just surviving the storm. It was time to find something to live for. A few weeks later, Evelyn found herself in a small coastal town in the south of France. The sun was setting as she sat at a cafe, sipping coffee alone, surrounded by the soft murmur of locals and the occasional laughter of tourists. She closed her eyes, letting the sound of the waves crashing against the shore fill her ears. It was nothing like the life she had lived. It was quiet, simple. And for the first time in years, Evelyn felt at peace. It was in that moment that she realized the truth. She hadn't just fought for her legacy. She had fought for her life, for the right to live it on her own terms. And though it had cost her everything, Evelyn was beginning to understand that she was still whole. The people who had betrayed her would never define her again. She would leave a new legacy, one not built on wealth or titles, but on integrity, strength, and the freedom to live authentically. As she sat there, a subtle warmth spreading in her chest, Evelyn smiled. The pain of the battle would never completely fade, but that was okay. She had fought for something far greater than victory. She had fought for her peace. Evelyn was no longer the woman defined by what others had taken from her. She was now the woman who had learned to stand on her own, who had learned to rise above the betrayals and the losses. She was free. And with that freedom, the future felt wide open. But as the night fell, Evelyn's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, and her breath caught. It was a message from Charlotte. Evelyn didn't open it. She didn't need to. The past was over. What came next was entirely hers to decide. Evelyn leaned back against the cushioned chair on the terrace, the warm Mediterranean breeze brushing against her skin. Her eyes scanned the vast horizon, where the sun dipped below the ocean in a cascade of colors that mirrored the new chapter of her life. For the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. Gone were the endless meetings in the cold, glass-walled boardrooms. Gone was the suffocating weight of maintaining a facade for a family that had crumbled under the pressure of lies and betrayal. The past was finally where it belonged, behind her. Evelyn had traded her sprawling mansion for a small villa overlooking the sea in a quiet coastal town in the south of France. The change wasn't just about the scenery, it was about reclaiming control of her life. She didn't need the constant reminders of what she had lost. What mattered now was what she was building, what she could still create. Her business was thriving, but this time, it wasn't just about wealth or success. Evelyn had begun to invest her energy into projects that spoke to her soul. She was using her experience, her painful lessons, as the foundation for a new legacy, one that was about creating meaningful impact rather than accumulating power. She had taken on roles in organizations that focused on mentorship for women in business, using her story to help others who had faced similar battles, whether in the boardroom or at home. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about giving back, helping people find their voice the way she had fought to find hers. For the first time, Evelyn felt a sense of fulfillment beyond the number of zeros in her bank account. She was creating something that would outlast her, something more important than any inheritance. Her legacy. It was a legacy of integrity, strength, and resilience. She had been to hell and back, and now she was building something based on the values she had always kept hidden. Until now. Evelyn took another sip of her wine and looked out over the bay. She was in no rush to go anywhere. The world was unfolding in front of her, but this moment, this space, was hers to savor. The freedom was intoxicating. She had never realized how much her life had been defined by the weight of other people's expectations, the need to appear perfect, to have it all. Now, she could finally breathe. And there were parts of her that she was rediscovering. The parts that had been buried beneath the pressure of family obligations, business deals, and the constant worry of keeping everyone else's world intact. She traveled more, learning about places, cultures, and ideas that once felt like luxuries she couldn't afford. She took cooking classes in the heart of the Tuscan countryside, wandered the streets of Barcelona, and spent afternoons in quiet libraries, reading books that had once been shoved aside by deadlines and demands. She was learning how to be herself again, just Evelyn, not the businesswoman, not the mother, not the ex-wife. Just the woman who could sit in silence and enjoy her own company without the noise of the world around her. And in this newfound freedom, Evelyn had discovered something she hadn't realized she was missing, the ability to connect deeply, without fear. She was building meaningful relationships with people who shared her values and respected her boundaries. No longer would she allow toxic relationships to dominate her life. She wasn't afraid to say no, to walk away from people who drained her energy, or from situations that didn't align with her truth. For the first time, Evelyn was surrounded by people who uplifted her, people who didn't want anything from her except genuine connection. She had learned the hard way that people who truly cared wouldn't manipulate her or demand things in exchange for their loyalty. She nurtured these relationships carefully, knowing how precious they were. She had nothing to prove anymore, no one to impress. She was enough, just as she was. But perhaps the greatest realization was that Evelyn had become her own greatest asset. The strength she had once thought of as a burden, her resolve, her tenacity, her ability to endure, had become her most valuable quality. It wasn't just the wealth, the empire, or the business success. It was the quiet power that came from knowing who she was, from embracing both the scars and the triumphs that had shaped her into the woman she had become. The road to this place hadn't been easy, and it never would be. The scars would always be there, reminding her of the cost of survival. But as Evelyn walked through the cobblestone streets of the town, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She was no longer a woman defined by betrayal. She was the woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. As she watched the sun finally disappear behind the horizon, Evelyn felt a shift. There was no more fear, No more guilt. There was only hope, and the understanding that her future, whatever it might hold, would be one that she would shape entirely on her own terms. No longer would she wait for the world to give her permission. She had already taken it, and in that moment, Evelyn Harper knew that the next chapter, her real future, had just begun. Evelyn sat by the window of her new apartment, the soft glow of the afternoon sun filtering through the curtains. The air was warm, but her mind was cool, clear. It had been several months since the verdict. Time had passed, but the journey, the long, painful road she had walked, still felt fresh, still deeply etched into her soul. Yet, for the first time, she was able to look back without the heavy weight of anger or bitterness. The peace she had fought so hard to find was finally within reach. The battle with Charlotte had taken everything. It had stolen her sense of trust, her belief in family, her sense of security. But it had also given her something she hadn't known she was missing, a sense of self, a resilience that had been buried beneath years of duty and expectation. Evelyn's journey had never been just about wealth or success. It had been about reclaiming the parts of herself she had lost along the way. Evelyn reflected on the heartbreak, the moments when she had hoped, desperately, that Charlotte might change. The quiet prayers she had whispered, wishing her daughter would see reason, would understand the depth of the betrayal she had caused. But those moments were behind her now. What had been broken could not be fixed, and trying to force a reconciliation would only serve to tear her apart even more. As the weeks passed, Evelyn learned that the emotional toll of Charlotte's betrayal no longer defined her happiness or peace. The scars were still there, reminders of the pain she had endured, but they had become part of the tapestry of her life. She no longer felt weighed down by guilt or regret. She had learned to let go of the past and embrace the freedom she had earned. Evelyn's legacy was no longer about the empire she had built, the business deals, or the wealth she had accumulated. It wasn't about her name being etched into the history books, or her status as a powerful businesswoman. It was about the choices she had made to protect herself, to walk away from a future that was toxic, and to claim the life she truly deserved. She was proud of the woman she had become, the strength she had discovered in herself, the courage to stand firm, and the wisdom to finally put herself first. For so long, Evelyn had been defined by the roles she played, the mother, the ex-wife, the businesswoman. But now, she was Evelyn, just Evelyn. She was free from the expectations of others, free from the burden of maintaining appearances. She had the power to shape her future on her terms, and for the first time, that future felt limitless. She had rebuilt herself from the ground up. She had discovered what it meant to live authentically, to take joy in the simple things, to connect with people who valued her for who she was, not what she could give them. No longer was she weighed down by toxic relationships or the ghost of a past that had never truly been hers. Evelyn had stepped into a new chapter, one where she was in full control of her destiny. Her thoughts drifted to the future, a future that was full of possibilities. She had found peace, yes, but now she was discovering what it truly meant to live. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. There were new ventures on the horizon, new people to meet, new places to explore. The world was hers to conquer. And as she sat there, the warmth of the sun on her face, Evelyn felt a deep sense of contentment. For the first time in years, she had no fear of what came next. She wasn't holding on to the past anymore. She wasn't waiting for permission. She had already taken control of her life, and she was ready to embrace everything that lay ahead. Evelyn Harper had given up a lot, but in the end, she realized she had received the greatest gift of all: freedom. The freedom to be herself, to live life on her own terms, to carve out a future that was entirely hers. It wasn't just about the empire, the wealth, or the legacy anymore. It was about her peace, her strength, and the quiet power that came from knowing she had built it all, herself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Evelyn let out a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. She was free. And with that freedom came a sense of clarity and peace that no one could take away. She smiled to herself, her heart light, her spirit unburdened. I didn't need my daughter's gift, Evelyn whispered softly, the words escaping her lips like a quiet affirmation. I gave myself the greatest gift of all, freedom. And with that, Evelyn Harper stepped into her future, knowing that no matter what came next, she was ready.